Hello and welcome to Give Me the Remote, Episode 1, our very first. Woo! Okay, I am your co-host, John, and I'm joined by Sheridan.
Hi.
And we are two Australians, and what we're going to try and do is a weekly rundown of what we've been watching on online streaming services and other media, and giving our thoughts and possible recommendations so you can save time and avoid the rubbish and possibly enjoy the good stuff. Having said that, what do we got this time, Sheridan?
Well, I think we should probably start off with A Quiet Place, seeing as it's just been released in cinemas.
And also completely breaks the rules of this show. Hooray. Because we're meant to be only things that you can stream right now, and this is a cinematic release. Not to worry, we go to the cinema very, very rarely. Not because Sheridan doesn't like going to the cinema, she loves it, but because I worked for many years in cinemas, and it just annoys me how they do everything wrong. Okay, so A Quiet Place. Do you want to give us the premise?
So, it's a future world where that's been invaded by aliens who are blind but have very, very high sensitive ears or hearing, and basically you can't make any noise. And it follows a family of mum and dad, 3 kids, and just their struggle in trying to survive with 3 kids in a world where you've got to keep kids silent because they don't want to be silent, as you learn.
It's an overarching part of this is kids are an enormous pain in the ass, isn't it?
Totally. One of the really interesting things about this movie, though, is that the oldest daughter, who's played by Millicent Simmons, who in the movie is actually deaf.
Which is a problem because she can't hear the noise she's making.
Exactly. But it does make her really, really good at communicating in this new world because she's used to communicating in a world where... Well,
in fact, the family only all know sign language because they've got the deaf daughter, so it's a major part of how they survive.
Exactly. But that actress is actually deaf in real life, which I think is... really great to actually have a character that's being played by an actor who has the same disability.
I think they'd have trouble in this day and age to cast a deaf role to a non-deaf actor. They'd get protests.
On.
There'd be picketing. There'd be riots in the streets.
You can make Scarlett Johansson a Japanese person, for God's sake.
Scarlett Johansson can be anything she wants to be.
The other really good thing about this movie is it's only 90 minutes long.
It couldn't be any longer because there's not a lot of dialogue.
I know, that is true. But it's actually really refreshing to see a movie that is just, you can go out after dinner, you're not getting home at 11 o'clock at night. It's really nicely paced. It's not this 2 hour and 40 minutes, which I think is what Avengers is. I mean, I have to book a whole day to go and see that.
I mean, cinemas traditionally like 90-minute features because they can cram more sessions in. 2 hours 40 means you're basically losing 2 sessions in the whole day. You can't do an after work and a second one. And obviously the economics of Avengers is this whole thing of all its own. But the creep towards longer movies, it's possibly just because cinemas aren't getting the numbers of people wanting to watch movies that they used to. I mean, every time we go, it's full of ancient people. Everyone else is waiting for the digital release like we are.
Yeah, we don't want to leave the couch.
Yeah.
But it is kind of nice to go to the cinema and not have to deal with looking at your phone. Although I did notice you were looking at your Apple Watch during the movie, so that seems to be acceptable.
Yeah. It's a much smaller glaring light, and also it's white text on a black screen. Some other things with this movie, I mean, it's dumb. There's a whole lot of dumb, broken... Not even... I mean, a plot hole is a problem with the plot, but just a problem with the premise. I mean, the sound of the river masks the aliens. Move to the river.
I know.
Or move to the ocean where there's constant background noise. And how even did the aliens manage to defeat all of humanity? Except for this family. And there is an indication that there are other families at one point where he lights a watchfire and other watchfires light up in the distance. And it's well, why don't you team up? And there is this idea, though, that nothing can beat the aliens. There's one moment where it looks like the dad's about to get his axe into it and he just gets swatted, right?
Yes, that is true. But I don't think... I think this is just one of those movies you have to go and just kind of turn off a bit of logic and just enjoy the scares. And it is fun.
And there are many. And the other thing I found interesting was a lot of the scares are feminine-based. At the risk of getting a bit spoily, you've got how do you give birth?
it's definitely the worst labour that ever happened.
Yeah. And then what do you do with the baby? And I mean, they've got their plan. They've got this soundproof box. They're planning to raise the baby in the soundproof box for years.
I do have to say, like, you would be sort of thinking to yourself, if you're living in this world, maybe let's not get pregnant.
Doesn't solve some other problems. Dug a deep hole. Like, why weren't they underground?
Yeah, that's true.
Although digging holes is a noisy activity too,
yes.
I guess. But you know, but I mean, I was scared, genuinely scared at times. It's beautiful in parts. Do you think it's an allegory for domestic violence?
I have no idea what that means.
Well, I'm like, the whole thing... I mean, yes, there's the husband, and he's a lovely guy. In fact, I think they deliberately make him into a particularly lovely, noble...
They're actually married in real life, the husband and wife.
Right.
That's
I don't know if that adds or subtracts anything at all.
Either.
But
keep going.
I don't know, just this idea that if you make any noise, the alpha masculine, hyper-proportioned thing, beast, will destroy you. I just thought there was something there for family dysfunction as a
I don't know.
metaphor.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. They are a very traditionally structured family, though.
Well, they are, except by the end of it, it's... I mean, you know, again, without wanting to get too spoily on it, it basically becomes that the whole movie is actually... The hero is the mother.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. Both her childbirth and then just by the ending, she is the centre of the story.
Yeah. When you have to give birth silently, I think anyone listening who's had to give birth, they already know that woman's a hero.
Right, okay. So, how many stars?
Oh, what's our star rating? Is it out of 5?
Of course.
I'm going to go 4 stars.
4 stars? I'm going to go 4 stars just because I can't think of a good reason to give it less.
I really, really liked it. I thought it was fun.
But if any more movies come out with the premise of you can't make noise or you die, that's a 1-star movie. It can't be done again for, 20, 30 years?
Probably not.
Call it a generation.
Yes.
It's done its thing. All right. What's next?
Handmaid's Tale.
Handmaid's Tale, which is available here in Australia. We're watching it on the SBS On Demand feed.
Which is just, for people that refuse to pay for Netflix, they are loving this because they're finally getting something decent.
A good show.
For free.
Yep.
Because it's on Hulu, I think, in the US, which we don't have.
Yep, okay. So Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood book, sort of, I guess you'd call it a feminist dystopia?
Yeah, I mean, that a lot of people do say that. It is actually, I mean, the reason, because you don't watch it.
I have watched some of it.
But the reason I think that I like it so much is because it is one of the few dystopian futures that actually deals with what it would be like to be a woman in that kind of world.
Well, normally in dystopias, the women are all in chainmail bikinis being horribly raped.
Yeah, or they're just ancillary characters that no one really talks about.
Well, Mad Max Fury Road, there's a
that is true, and that is a great movie, but, you know, what are you doing when you get your period out in the desert? No one's talking about that. They're dealing with periods in Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
Like, it's actually...
That's one of the reasons I don't watch it.
It's very narrow-minded.
I guess I have there's some internal logical problems with... I mean, I'm a little over all dystopias, and there are problems with how you actually create a society that can be maintained in a dystopia. You know, in the Mad Max style thing, it's like, well, everyone's going to run out of petrol eventually.
Yeah.
Or the zombie movies. Eventually, you eat all the Twinkies in the stores, and then you're going to have to grow crops, and you're just back to having a society. Or the zombies will eat you, one or the other. And yeah, you've got the interim positions as you move from one stage to the next. I guess that's always where interesting things happen. And similarly, the Handmaid's Tale dystopia, I don't view it as a particularly credible vision of the future, just because it has internal inconsistencies, but 1984's got those inconsistencies. Brave New World's got those inconsistencies. Every dystopian vision has got those inconsistencies, so that's probably an unfair criticism on my part. It's just that as a bloke, it makes me uncomfortable, and then I go looking for reasons to hate it.
But it, like, genuinely, it is actually a future that I could vaguely imagine happening, and it's terrifying as a woman. Like, it is a terrifying future that they present in this show, which is what makes it so appealing.
Absolutely, but a lot of those relatable horror notes are less relatable to men, which isn't to say it's not television worth making and television worth watching. It's just that for once in my life, I'm not the audience, because I'm a straight white male. Everything's always been made for me, and now, holy crap.
One of the great things that show does, though, is, and actually, I mean, this really comes from the book, I guess, but they're very good at actually showing how women are complicit in ensuring that the structure of that society works. Like, women are kind of pitted against each other through the different hierarchies that they have within the society.
Any system of social compulsion relies on enforcers at multiple tiers. You can't just have one, dare I say it, dude standing at the top making commands. You've got to have people all the way down the line invested in their own stake in the system to keep someone else down.
Yeah.
We do it with sweatshops in Bangladesh, but yeah.
I do get a little bit frustrated, and they're definitely going there this season because we're outside of the books now. Or the book, sorry. But I think the reason the show has become so popular is because people actually see it as being a society that could happen with all the whole Trump thing and just the situation of modern day politics. And I think they might be going a bit too hard down that road now, so they're doing flashbacks to before, and so how it's...
the rise of the populist leader.
And it's a bit too obvious.
It's not even particularly necessary, is it? I mean...
Well, I mean, it is necessary now because they're outside of all the book content, so they've got to fill space.
Yeah, I just think it's a bit sad that they're having to throw modern day political allegory into...
I agree. I think it's a little, a little much, but...
Okay, anything else you want to say on this one? How many stars?
Oh, well, I'm rating this season or last season? I think last season would be 4 stars for me.
Mm-hmm. Bit less for this one?
Well, I don't know. I'm only 2 episodes in. I also made the major mistake of... with SBS On Demand, it said play latest, and I assumed SBS On Demand was as sophisticated as Netflix, so I just hit yes. And it showed me episode 2. I was like, man, they've really jumped really far forward in this. And then realised, oh no. So I've watched them out of order, so that might be, not a great thing.
For the foreign audiences, SBS is a Australian TV station that's sort of a de facto second government broadcaster with a few ads in it. It's a strange beast, but it's generally good for documentaries, and they paid for the rights to Handmaid's Tale, and god damn it, they're going to get their mess out of that. I'm going to decline to give this a rating because I haven't watched it all and I only read half the book, and that's mostly because I'm the wrong person for it. Not because there's anything wrong with it. What's next?
Ash versus Evil Dead. I mean, you just got to follow Handmaid's Tale. Just got to follow Handmaid's Tale with some schlocky horror.
And now you generally dislike misogyny.
Oh yeah, but
when Bruce Campbell does it, it's charming.
I think that there's a lot of nostalgia there for me, and being a woman of my age, a lot of nostalgia is going to involve misogyny. So,
But there are a lot of strong female characters.
Oh, there definitely are.
In Ash
Kelly's
versus
awesome.
Evil Dead. Yeah. And for those who haven't watched it, so particularly a younger audience, the Evil Dead movies, Evil Dead 1, Evil Dead 2, and then Army of Darkness.
Yeah.
Which is essentially is Evil Dead 3. Were cult horror and really groundbreaking in their day, but have sort of been largely overtaken.
And something that will make you feel old is that the show is set 35 years after the first movie.
Yeah. Now, of course, the first Evil Dead was famous for the infamous tree rape scene. And then the whole thing, you've got Ash, who's a loser, who goes around with a shotgun, some witty catchphrases. It's a Dodge Delta is the car, isn't it?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not really into cars. It's a cool car.
Well, see, the whole point is it's not a cool car.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
See, I'm really not into cars.
I mean, it's a big old American-built car. In Australia, it's very similar to a Kingswood, I guess. And Ash has got his chainsaw for his hand. He loses his hand to try to fight the Army of Darkness or the Evil Dead at one point. So he's got a chainsaw on one arm and a shotgun in the other, or the boomstick, as we love to call it. He's a sleazy, grotesque, aging Lothario with
alcohol problem,
drugs.
He's basically...
He lives in a trailer.
He's a loser.
He's a loser, but he's the chosen one. Only he can fight the Army of Darkness, and the Evil Dead, and the Necronomicon. The show... So we've just had the third season has come to a conclusion. It's just amazing, these set pieces of horror, action, comedy, drama that they interweave into every episode.
Oh, they've done an awesome job at not trying to actually reinvent what is appealing about Evil Dead for fans. They're like, you know what Evil Dead fans want? They want Ash making kind of dirty jokes, being a sleaze, but being hilarious, and they want really, really dodgy zombies and a whole lot of blood.
And, I mean, also, I've got to say, Lucy Lawless's role throughout this as the steely demon queen Ruby, she's just great.
Oh, yeah, she's awesome. Great role for Lucy Lawless.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about it?
No.
No?
I think I would even probably give this 5 stars.
5
just
stars.
Because I love Evil Dead so much.
And they've done it just so perfectly. I mean, I think 3 seasons probably was stretching it a little bit. I'm really glad they wound it up now because the storylines were getting so convoluted. Everyone had died a million times, been taken over by evil a million times.
So I actually didn't realise it's over.
Yeah.
Oh no.
That's
I'm
why
really sad about that.
That's why he drives off into the distance in the future in his tank car.
I just assume he'd start again. That's really sad.
Anyway, it's 3 seasons of just wonderful, campy, action horror fun. I mean, there is no cheesy horror filmmaking trick they don't pull out here. They just go through A to Z, the whole book of them, don't they?
Yeah.
And pretty much all invented, to be fair, by Sam Raimi in the first place.
One thing I want to know is how those actors dealt with having all that spray of fake blood constantly going into their mouths.
I mean, the whole show's built around getting horrible stuff going to people's
mouth
mouths.
Open, just blood in there.
Yeah, well, it's not real blood. I think it's just
raspberry
cordial.
It's not real blood.
You know? I assume they do something that tastes nice. Or maybe they want something that tastes horrible, so their actor's face is really... Ugh.
I think they use corn syrup with, food dye. I might be wrong, but I think that's what they do.
Tomato sauce is very popular as well, I gather. Which is also corn syrup with food dye.
That's true.
Pretty much. So.
That is true.
Look, I'm not going to argue with 5 stars for Ash vs. Evil Dead. I think it's a brilliant send-off for the franchise. I mean, no one ever thought... Because the Army of Darkness was, almost 20 years ago.
I think it's probably longer.
Yeah, and I just thought that was going to be the end of the story.
Yeah.
And the idea that they could bring it back and shoot it with decent production values and get 3 seasons of just great fun, jokes about Jacksonville, Florida, which is a place I know reasonably well and totally deserves every joke. Yeah, I mean, just bravo. And that's on Stars. We've been watching it on Stan here in Australia, but I believe Stars has their own thing. Right. Look, it's probably worth turning a subscription on, blasting through 3 seasons and turning it off if they've got nothing else you want to see.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Mm-hmm. So 5 stars all around, Ash vs. Evil Dead.
And as you said, check out Bruce Campbell's Twitter. He's just hilarious.
Yeah, Bruce Campbell on Twitter is... although he's been really active promoting the show for the last 3 years, he doesn't normally tweet that much the rest of the time. But like when he's going to conventions, he's done some hilarious stuff. People say, oh, I don't want to pay $50 to go to the convention. Can I just hang out in a bar with you? And he just shuts them down. He's like, buy a ticket, you bum.
He's just basically Ash.
Okay, what's next?
Well, let's talk about Riverdale.
Riverdale. So the Archie reimagining reboot coming to the end of season 2.
Is it season 2?
Yeah.
Feels like it's been going for a lot
They
longer.
go on forever. Well, you get like 22 episodes a season, so and they're all really long, like an hour. So this is, if you've read Archie comics, Riverdale is loosely based on Archie. I understand the guys behind the show are actually the same people behind the comic books, which makes it really interesting because it's basically every dark fanfic idea that's ever been thrown at Archie comes out. I mean, you know, Archie joins the mob. Archie creates a vigilante gang. Archie just freaking murders people.
Archie is actually a bit of an a-hole.
Oh, he's terrible to his dad. He is the worst son you could imagine. I mean, he keeps agonising, oh, I want to be a good son. And then he just screws his dad over.
And it's just Luke Perry, who plays the father, just doing... He has like one facial expression, which is,
sad. I'm
disappointed in you, Archie.
Oh, you've accepted a car from the mob. I wanted to build a car with you, son, but you've accepted a car from the mobsters. The outfits are amazing.
It is very well, like the style. It is stylized very well.
And Archie takes his top off a lot, which I think you enjoy.
Oh, does he?
You haven't noticed Archie's buff, ripped muscles?
Yeah, I guess he does. I just find it really weird how he has those really dark eyebrows with that red hair.
You don't think the collars match the cuffs?
No, they do not.
You think they could touch the eyebrows up, wouldn't you?
I think the what's his name? Is it Richard Greco that plays the dad of the friend?
Veronica?
No, the
Jughead?
Jughead.
Right.
He's hotter.
Is that Richard Greco?
I think
Because he was in
might
Jump
not
Street.
be.
No.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right,
I
this
should have
is
Googled
terrible
this before.
research. Boom! Look, we've got 21 minutes into the show before a real research fail. That's probably as good as it's going to get from here on in, folks. So, I mean, again, without wanting to be too spoily, Veronica gets into sex webcamming, domination. She murders a bunch of people. Sorry, Betty. Murders people, covers up murders. I mean, she's basically an outlaw by the end of the season because she literally is in situations where she should call the police, but she can't because if the police start digging around, they're going to find all the bodies in the backyard. True. And, I mean, she feeds human beings to serial killers.
She has really gotten really dark. I don't know how they're going to actually take this show much further than this season.
You think they just need to burn the whole town down at this point, don't you?
Well, it's just gone... I mean, obviously, it's not meant to be realistic, but the characters in so many ways are now so far removed from what they're meant to be that it's just craziness. It's just all that chaos.
But it remains, except for the musical episode.
Oh, God, that musical episode sucked. Why did they do that?
Although it was so upbeat and da-da-da-da-da, and then the ending, blur. I mean, it was a ride.
And the singing, though, was atrocious.
Yeah, auto-tune was being stretched to places or even auto-tune can't go. Yeah. It was funny hearing the algorithm giving up in places and just jumping keys. But, yeah, sorry. But it's been worth watching.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm starting to get a little bit too crazy for me now. I'm enjoying a lot less than the first season.
A lot of people have been saying it's jumped the shark.
Yeah. Like, I think the whole Dark Betty thing is just a bit too far.
Dark Betty was there right from the start, though.
I know, but she was sort of not really that bad. It was really more like in the realms of teenage rebellion. But now, as you say, she's like literally getting the Black Hood to like murder people for her. Yeah. Like, it's a little bit more serious.
Oh, and luring people to the Black Hood.
She's not just putting on a wig and having a few shots of tequila and getting in a spa bath.
Well, when she was holding that guy's head under the water with her stilettoed foot, that wasn't fooling around.
Yeah, but she let it go.
It's all good fun if you let him breathe eventually. Look,
I really like how they've... Basically, I think there's a lot of families with teenage kids out there that are loving watching this show together, though, because you have all of the parents are from every single sitcom for, you know, serial from the 90s, from like Melrose Place, Beverly Hills 90210, and then all the kids are like
new generation.
And like it has something for parents and kids. That's very smart if you think about it.
That is something I had not thought about, and there we go. Cross-promotion and marketing for the win. All right. What's next?
Well, I think we're going to talk about Blues Brothers, which I have to actually...
Second time we've broken the rule of the show in our first episode. Look,
although it was on TV.
It was on TV, and it is on SBS On Demand.
You would be able to watch it on demand, I'm sure.
So, Blues Brothers, absolutely seminal cult movie if you grew up in the 1990s.
Which I have to embarrassingly say, never watched in full.
Until last night.
And
we had to watch it with ads.
Yeah.
Ads!
It felt very retro.
You think the ads completed the retro
They
experience?
did. It made me really feel like I was just back in the living room in the 90s.
Okay, so the history of the movie, it was in its day the most expensive movie ever made. I think it cost over $100 million, which in
oh really? Wow.
early 1980s
1980 it came out.
Yeah, so it was made in 79, 78, 79. So I mean, a phenomenal amount of money and absolutely bombed. Partly because it's not actually a movie.
No, it's just a bunch of like really famous people singing songs.
And a bunch of scenes very loosely linking together, and weird cartoonness and continuity breaks as well. Like towards the end of the big show at the hotel where they raise the money to save the orphanage, they just cut from the band all being in tuxedos playing behind podiums to the band just being in normal clobber and just standing around on stage. And there's no... So there's a moment of fantasy realism when they're doing Minnie the Moocher in old school jazz in old school costumes. But I mean,
the music is the best thing about it.
Oh, I mean, the soundtrack is phenomenal, which is part of the reason why the movie went on to become such a huge cult classic. I've also got a very strong suspicion that it's just a great movie to watch if you're, dare I say it, quite stoned, because you just zone in and out of bits and go, wow, that's cool. Why is Carrie Fisher trying to murder them?
The female characters, if you could even call them that in this movie, though, I mean, it is so sexist.
So you have Mother Superior, who's a short-lived caricature.
Exactly. She's just
and also, she's nun. Like, she refuses to let them steal the money they need to keep the orphanage open. And yet, at the end of it, they've gone on a crime spree that has brought in 3 police forces and the National Guard and the army.
I don't even think she's a character. She's just a plot device.
Well, what's the difference between a character and a plot
well,
device?
No, she's in like one scene, isn't she?
Yeah.
So, I mean, she's not a
You're not a character if you don't have more than one scene?
I don't know. She's...
Sammy Davis Jr. only had one scene. He was a character. Sorry, not Sammy Davis Jr. I'm Ray Charles. My apologies. Yeah. Okay, so female characters.
Well, that's a cameo, though.
Did Mother Superior was a cameo?
Well, no, because she's not famous.
How do you know?
I'm pretty sure she's not.
Okay. So we got Mother Superior for a female character. We've got Carrie Fisher as the...
Carrie Fisher is the worst.
Jilted
she's the
girlfriend.
psycho girlfriend
who just wants to be told she's loved.
And then is...
And literally thrown in the dirt.
Literally thrown in the dirt. She is treated like shit. He's just like gaslighting her the entire time. He's abusive. He's horrible.
And I mean, but she's very well. She's good at reading manuals. I mean, if it wasn't for the whole fantasy element of the show, of the movie, where she keeps hitting them with bazookas and demolishing their horrible hostel they're living in, and blasting the phone box they're in hundreds of meters into the air, which lands without causing any harm to them. So they're basically indestructible, which does detract from any sense of jeopardy, because once that's happened, I mean, what possibly can hurt them? I mean, police could fill them full of holes; they wouldn't die. I mean, she shoots them up with rocket launchers. They just dust the rubble off themselves. So that's Carrie Fisher, and then of course the big cameo, which I've got to say, we were watching this, and I kept saying, "Do you know who this is?" And I kept being told, "No." And now, what's your special talent, Sheridan?
It's recognising people's voices, but to be fair, I don't recognise people's singing voices, and I don't really know what Aretha Franklin sounds like when she's talking.
So the point is, it's Aretha Franklin's in the movie, right?
It is Aretha Franklin.
Yeah, and then she does this great version of Respect. Was it Respect or Think? It was Think.
Yeah, it's not Respect.
Yeah. So she does this great version of Think, and then the Blues Brothers, in a mysterious moment, as trying to reform the band, instead of saying, wow, this is the greatest jazz singer in
Yeah.
the world. No, we'll just take her husband on.
I know. It is ridiculous. And so that is the extent of women in Blues Brothers. And
Twiggy.
oh, sorry, I did forget about Twiggy. That again is just a cameo, though.
2 scenes.
I think that still counts as a cameo.
Yeah, and also one of the scenes is just her standing around waiting for the Blues Brothers to turn up, or a Blues Brother to turn up.
Yes, it's failing the...
she doesn't really have a lot of agency there, does she?
No.
And yet, I mean, the cameos are amazing. I mean, even today, I mean, that's one of the funny things, how well it's held up, is that those names like Ray Charles, like Aretha Franklin.
There's James Brown. There's basically all of the big names in American R&B from the 70s.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, and then they have their cameos, and they get to look good in their cameos. And I mean, the individual scenes are great, the songs are great, the dancing's fantastic. I mean, they turned Rawhide into a country music standard, which still gets played in bars all over the world on a near constant basis. I mean, their depiction of American country and western bar, I mean, that stands up. Those places are timeless hellholes, and with the chicken wire, with the glasses bouncing off it. I think, as a snapshot of America at that moment, while there's a lot of fantasy to it and a lot of strange things, it's also really quite interesting as a depiction of the time, I thought. And I know you have some problems with what you felt was racism in the film.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know if it's racism or cultural appropriation or what it is, but I mean, there's obviously a lot of jazz blues singers who just sort of appear throughout and perform, and the band is primarily made up of white dudes.
It's a pretty multiracial band.
The main players out the front, though, are white.
No, the Blues Brothers are white, although they're Catholic, which in the 1970s there's still a bit of stigma there,
And it ends with like them singing Elvis, which is like...
Well, the ending for me is the hardest thing. This is their happy ending. Yes, they've saved the orphanage. Spoilers. But they end up in prison. But it's a happy ending because they're in prison together and they can all play. And I'm like, if you're the dudes in the band, they had lives before the Blues Brothers tried to reform the band. Would you be talking to the dudes who got you landed in the slammer? I mean... Yeah,
probably not.
So that the happy ending is, we're all together and playing in the band, so that's the happy ending. But you're in prison. And then the dancing at the end almost looks like a prison riot starting to me. I feel control has totally been lost. I am still going to give it as a nostalgia kick. If you haven't watched it in a while, I reckon just watch it again. It is tremendous fun from start to finish, and just the end of an era of filmmaking, a style of making films in American cinema where the humour was really, really understated in a way, and from there they moved to a much more over-the-top mode of humour, which is more accessible to common denominators. And now we're moving, of course, to filmmaking being made for international audiences, where if the joke isn't made in physical comedy, it basically hasn't been made. And that's why Transformers and Fast and Furious and Marvel movies are the future, because they can play all over the world with minimal translation.
Yes.
There's a filmmaker in front of me is looking at me skeptically.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of range in comedy, but yeah, in those blockbusters, I agree.
Yeah, and what's the point in making a Hollywood movie? Because the cost of making the movie is now tiny. I mean, it's about 30% of the marketing budget now.
Well, A Quiet Place cost $20 million and has already made $230 million. I mean, that's just crazy.
Yeah, but that's the lottery winner syndrome. You're hearing about the one that made it. But the and also it's such an unusual movie that's it's always going to generate huge word of mouth. And frankly, every pretentious git on the planet is going to go and see it just because it's silent. And also,
I don't know about that. It's marketed very much as a horror movie.
Okay, we're going back to A Quiet Place there. Let's finish with the Blues Brothers, though. Stars?
I find this one very difficult to rate because I have none of the nostalgia with it because I had never seen it. And I was very offended as a woman. So But I can see there's elements of it that, if I had have watched it 30 years ago, would have been good. But I'm going to go 2 stars.
2 stars for the Blues Brothers.
Stars.
Bloody hell. Address your complaints to. What did we call the email address again?
What did you rate it?
Oh, the movie, 5 stars.
5?
5 stars. Just straight nostalgia kick. It's not a great movie. It's barely a movie at all. But as a extended music video with some rare moments of comedy and a lot of phrases, you can just hear the sound of phrases being coined that people use today unironically and in a fresh sense. And you can, it's like, oh god, that was 1980. That was, maybe those phrases were in broader use before then, but a few of them I'm pretty sure they made up.
It is the best looking you'll ever see Dan Aykroyd.
Oh, yeah, it was all downhill from there.
I've never found him attractive, but, later in life now, I'm looking back at him and I'm thinking, not so bad.
Well, it was probably Jim Belushi at his best as well.
Yeah, well, didn't he die like 2 years later?
Yeah, not long after that, but he never looked good.
No.
Except, I mean, he trimmed down a lot for him, I think, for the role. Because, you don't get too fat you didn't get too fat in prison back then. Apparently they feed them horrible food now, so it's impossible to get fat now too. There's a weight loss program waiting to happen.
I don't think you'd want to be in an American prison.
No, I really wouldn't. Even if I was with my band. Especially if I put them in there. Look, we're going to wrap up the show. We do have an email address we'll include in the next podcast when we remember what it is.
I know what it is.
Go on.
It's GMTR podcast at gmail.com.
There we go. Address your complaints for Sheridan's terrible review of the Blues Brothers there. We're going to be on Twitter. We're on Facebook. And, of course, we're on Libsyn. If you're listening to this, you found us one way or the other. Anyway, thank you very much for making it through a pretty strong first outing for the show. I promise we will try and stick entirely to things you two can watch digitally as we watch it. And we'll see you next week. Good night from me.
Good night from me.